After 16 years heading sales, my boss fired me. "You're too costly. 2 grads can do your job." I answered, "Fresh talent is great, but experience is priceless." That's what I told Richard Manning, VP of Operations at Pinnacle Solutions, as he delivered the news across his glass conference table. His quarterly reports were spread out like evidence in a court case, each page showing cost reduction targets that apparently justified destroying careers built over decades. He didn't look up from his laptop when he said it, just kept typing, probably already drafting the email announcing my replacement to the board. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that harsh corporate glow that makes bad news look even worse. 16 years. I'd built the entire sales operation from the ground up when Pinnacle was just another small-time consulting firm trying to make it in the competitive business solutions market. Back then, we had 12 employees and dreams of landing our first $1 million contract. Now we had 200 employees, and I'd personally brought in over $40 million in revenue during my tenure. But numbers on spreadsheets don't tell the whole story, and Richard Manning had never understood that. I started at Pinnacle Solutions in 2008, right after the financial crisis when companies were cutting everything that wasn't nailed down. Our founder, Patricia Wells, hired me because she needed someone who could not only sell but could build relationships that would survive economic downturns. She understood that in the business consulting world, clients don't buy services, they buy trust. "We're not just selling process optimization," Patricia used to tell me during our early strategy sessions. "We're selling peace of mind. These executives are betting their careers on our advice. They need to trust the person delivering it." She was right. Over 16 years, I'd cultivated relationships with CFOs, CEOs, and operations directors at 37 major companies. Not just transactional relationships where we sent proposals and they cut checks, but real partnerships built on mutual respect and proven results. When global tech needed to restructure their entire supply chain, they didn't put the project out for competitive bidding. They called me directly. When Morrison Manufacturing was facing regulatory compliance issues that could have shut them down, their CEO called my personal cell phone at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. When Apex Financial was considering a merger that would affect 800 employees, they flew me out to Denver to walk through the implications before making any decisions. These weren't just clients. They were relationships I'd nurtured through quarterly business reviews, annual strategy sessions, holiday dinners, and golf tournaments. I knew their kids' names, their retirement plans, their biggest fears about their businesses. They trusted me because I'd earned it, one successful project at a time over more than a decade. Richard Manning saw none of that when he looked at my salary line in the budget. "Your compensation has grown significantly over the years," he said, finally looking up from his screen. "We're at a point where we need to optimize our cost structure for competitive positioning." Translation: "You're expensive, and we think we can get the same results for less money." "The market has changed," he continued. "Clients expect digital communications, streamlined processes, data-driven proposals. 2 fresh MBA graduates with strong analytical skills can handle the same client load you're managing now." I kept my expression neutral. "Have you discussed this transition with our major clients?" "That won't be necessary. Business relationships are with the company, not individual employees. Our brand strength and service quality will maintain client satisfaction." I nodded slowly. "I understand your perspective, but I understood something else too. Something Richard Manning had never learned in his 3 years at the company, despite his MBA from Wharton and his previous experience in private equity cost-cutting. Client loyalty in the business consulting world isn't institutional. It's personal. When Patricia Wells sold Pinnacle to Manning's investment group 18 months ago, she'd pulled me aside with a warning. "These guys see everything through spreadsheets," she said. "They don't understand that our clients stay with us because they trust specific people, not because they love our corporate logo." She'd been right to worry. The termination meeting lasted 22 minutes. Richard had obviously rehearsed his talking points about organizational right-sizing and leveraging junior talent for scalability. He offered me a standard severance package, 2 months' salary and continued health insurance for 6 months. Generous by most standards, insulting for someone who'd generated millions in revenue for the company. "We'll announce your departure as a mutual decision to pursue new opportunities," he said, sliding the severance agreement across the table. "Professional transition, nothing negative." And my clients? Jessica Chen and David Rodriguez will be taking over your accounts. They're both Harvard MBAs with excellent analytical backgrounds. They'll do great. Jessica and David. Two bright kids I'd met during the hiring process 6 months earlier. Fresh out of graduate school, impressive GPAs, sharp presentation skills, and absolutely zero experience managing million-dollar client relationships or navigating the politics of corporate decision-making. Good kids, but they didn't know the difference between closing a deal and maintaining a partnership. They'll need comprehensive briefings on each account, I said. Already planned? They'll have access to all your files and CRM data. Everything's documented. Everything's documented. The eternal corporate fantasy that complex relationships can be reduced to database entries and call logs. I signed the severance agreement and walked out with my personal belongings in a cardboard box. 16 years reduced to family photos, a coffee mug, and the small cactus plant my assistant had given me for my 10th anniversary. My colleagues watched me leave with the uncomfortable silence that comes when people realize their own job security isn't as solid as they'd assumed. A few offered quiet words of support, but most just looked away. Self-preservation in corporate environments. That night, I sat in my home office and did what any experienced sales professional does when facing a major change. I analyzed the situation strategically. Richard Manning had made several assumptions that would prove costly. First, he assumed that client relationships were transferable. That million-dollar contracts would continue automatically because the company name remained the same. Second, he assumed that analytical skills and MBA credentials were equivalent to industry experience and relationship management. Third, he assumed that cost reduction would improve profitability without considering the revenue impact of losing key accounts. But most importantly, he'd never bothered to understand how business development actually works in the consulting industry. My clients didn't stay with Pinnacle because of our marketing materials or competitive pricing. They stayed because they trusted me personally to deliver results and protect their interests. Some had been working with me for over a decade, through multiple job changes, company acquisitions, and strategic pivots. When Marcus Torres at Global Tech needed to cut operational costs by 20% without laying off employees, he didn't want to explain his situation to a new consultant. He wanted to call someone who already understood his business, his constraints, and his long-term goals. When Catherine Phillips at Morrison Manufacturing was dealing with a supply chain crisis that threatened their largest customer relationship, she didn't have time to educate a junior consultant about the intricacies of her industry. She needed someone who could immediately grasp the implications and provide actionable solutions. These relationships had been built through years of delivering results, maintaining confidentiality, and proving reliability under pressure. You can't transfer that to someone new through a CRM database and a briefing document. But Richard Manning was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I didn't have to wait long. The first crack appeared 11 days after my termination. Marcus Torres from Global Tech called my personal cell phone, which I'd maintained as a backup contact for years. "Where the hell are you?" he said without preamble when I answered. "I've been trying to reach you at Pinnacle, but they keep transferring me to some kid who doesn't know the difference between operational efficiency and cost reduction." "I'm no longer with the company, Marcus." Long pause. "What do you mean you're no longer with the company? You are Pinnacle for us. We've been working together for 8 years. Management decided to restructure the sales team. Jessica Chen is handling your account now." Jessica Chen? I talked to her yesterday. Nice enough kid, but she spent 20 minutes trying to sell me services we don't need and couldn't answer basic questions about our existing contract. I kept my voice neutral. I'm sure she's working hard to get up to speed. "This is bullshit. Who made this decision?" "Richard Manning, the VP of Operations." "I want to talk to him. Today." The second call came 2 days later from Catherine Phillips at Morrison Manufacturing. "I need you back on our account immediately," she said. "This David Rodriguez they assigned to us just recommended a supply chain overhaul that would take 18 months and cost $3 million. For a problem you could have solved with a phone call and a process adjustment." "I'm no longer with Pinnacle, Catherine." "Since when? And why wasn't I informed? We have a quarterly review scheduled next week that I've been preparing for months. You'll need to reschedule with David." "I'm not rescheduling anything. I'm calling whoever's in charge over there and getting some answers." By the end of the second week, I'd received similar calls from 12 of my major accounts. The pattern was always the same. confusion about my departure, frustration with the new consultants, and demands to speak with senior management. Richard Manning, meanwhile, was discovering that managing million-dollar client relationships was more complicated than he'd assumed. The first major blow came from Apex Financial. Their CFO, Robert Kim, had been planning a major operational restructuring that would have generated a $2 million consulting contract. When David Rodriguez couldn't answer specific questions about regulatory implications during their initial meeting, Robert canceled the project entirely. If Pinnacle can't provide senior-level expertise for a project this critical, we'll find another firm that can, he told Richard during what I later learned was a very uncomfortable phone call. The second blow came from TechFlow Industries. They'd been considering expanding their existing contract to include change management services for a corporate merger. When Jessica Chen suggested a cookie-cutter approach that ignored the unique cultural challenges of their specific industry, they decided to handle the transition internally. But the third blow was the one that really got Richard's attention. Global Tech didn't just cancel their pending contracts. Marcus Torres called Richard directly and threatened to terminate their existing agreements if I wasn't brought back to manage their account. I don't care what your internal politics are, Marcus told him. I've been working with him for 8 years. He knows our business, he delivers results, and my board trusts his judgment. Without him, there's no relationship. Richard tried to convince Marcus that Jessica could provide the same level of service with fresh analytical approaches and innovative methodologies. Marcus wasn't interested. Fresh analytical approaches? Marcus said. Kid, I don't need innovative methodologies. I need someone who understands that when I call with a problem, it gets solved quickly and correctly. Your new consultant spent an hour explaining why we should redesign our entire operational framework. The solution was a 15-minute process adjustment. Global Tech represented $4 million in annual recurring revenue. 3 weeks after my termination, Richard Manning called my personal phone. "We need to talk," he said when I answered. "About what?" "About coming back. We've had some transition challenges with your accounts." I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the most effective negotiating strategy. "Several clients have expressed concerns about the account transitions," he continued. "They're requesting your continued involvement in their projects." "I'm no longer an employee, Richard." "That's what I want to discuss. We'd like to offer you a consulting arrangement. Temporary basis while we complete the transition process." "What kind of consulting arrangement?" "We could bring you back part-time to help with client relations. Maybe 3 days a week while Jessica and David get up to speed." I thought about it. "What's the rate?" "We were thinking your previous salary prorated for part-time hours." "My consulting rate is $500 per hour." Long pause. "That's significantly higher than your previous compensation. That's the market rate for senior consulting expertise, supply and demand. We'd need to discuss that with finance. You know where to find me." Richard didn't call back immediately. I assumed they were trying to handle the client situation internally, probably hoping the relationships would stabilize once Jessica and David had more time to establish rapport. But the crisis was accelerating. Morrison Manufacturing canceled their annual strategy assessment, a project worth $800,000, after David Rodriguez presented a proposal that missed the key operational constraints Catherine Phillips had outlined in their initial meeting. He recommended solutions that would require us to shut down production for 6 weeks, Catherine told Richard during what became known around the office as the phone call from hell. Either he doesn't understand our business or he doesn't care about our requirements. Pacific Industries, another long-term client, announced they were switching to a competitor after Jessica Chen failed to identify a regulatory compliance issue that could have cost them millions in penalties. It was the kind of industry-specific knowledge that takes years to develop and can't be learned from textbooks. But the final straw came from Sterling Corporation, our second-largest account. Their CEO, Patricia Hawkins, didn't just cancel their pending projects. She flew out personally to meet with Richard and terminated their master services agreement entirely. "Your company has changed," she told him during a meeting that I later heard about from multiple sources. "The person we trusted is gone, and his replacements don't have the experience or judgment to handle our level of complexity. We're taking our business elsewhere." Sterling Corporation represented $6 million in annual revenue. 4 weeks after my termination, Richard called again, this time at 8 p.m. on a Friday night. We need to make a deal, he said, skipping all pleasantries. What kind of deal? Full consulting contract, your rate, your terms. We need you back immediately. To do what exactly? Save the accounts we're losing. Fix the relationships that have been damaged. Get things back to where they were. I was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. Richard, you fired me because you thought 2 recent graduates could do my job for less money. Now you want to hire me back as a consultant at a rate that's 3 times what you were paying me as an employee. The situation has evolved. The situation has evolved because you didn't understand what you were optimizing away. These client relationships took 16 years to build. You can't replace that with MBA credentials and fresh analytical approaches. I understand that now. Do you? Because this isn't just about bringing me back to fix an immediate crisis. If you want to rebuild these relationships, it's going to take time and consistent effort. You can't just patch things up and then make the same mistake again in 6 months. What are you proposing? A 1-year consulting contract at my stated rate. Exclusive arrangement, meaning I work only with Pinnacle clients during that period, and I have final say on account management decisions for the clients I'm handling. Another long pause. That's going to cost us significantly more than your original salary. It's going to cost you significantly less than losing 40% of your major accounts. Richard agreed to my terms the following Monday. But by then, it was too late to save several key relationships. Sterling Corporation had already signed with Deloitte. Pacific Industries had moved their account to McKinsey. TechFlow had decided to handle their projects internally rather than risk another consulting relationship. The damage assessment was brutal. In 4 weeks, Pinnacle had lost over $12 million in annual recurring revenue. Projects that had been in development for months were canceled. Potential new business that I'd been nurturing was dead on arrival because the clients no longer trusted the company's ability to deliver consistent service. Of the remaining accounts, some were salvageable and some weren't. Global Tech stayed after I personally called Marcus Torres and walked him through a comprehensive transition plan that addressed his specific concerns about service continuity. Morrison Manufacturing agreed to a reduced contract scope after I spent 3 days on-site rebuilding Catherine Phillips's confidence in Pinnacle's capabilities. But even the accounts we saved came at a cost. Clients who had previously given us broad latitude in project scope and pricing now demanded detailed oversight and competitive pricing reviews. The trust that had allowed us to work as strategic partners rather than just service vendors was damaged, possibly permanently. This feels different, Marcus Torres told me during our first meeting after I returned as a consultant. I'm glad you're back, but I need more assurance that this won't happen again. What kind of assurance? Contract language that specifies your personal involvement in our account. If Pinnacle wants to make changes to our relationship management, they need our approval first. Other clients made similar demands. Personal service guarantees, right of refusal on account transitions, even penalty clauses if key personnel were removed from their accounts without consent. It was the kind of client relationship management that most consulting firms would find restrictive and unprofitable. But it was the price of rebuilding trust after Richard Manning's cost-cutting experiment had destroyed it. 6 months into my consulting arrangement, I was contacted by Patricia Wells, Pinnacle's original founder. She'd been following the company's struggles through industry networks and wanted to know if I was interested in a conversation about new opportunities. Richard Manning called me last week, she said during our lunch meeting at the restaurant where we'd celebrated landing our first $1 million contract 8 years earlier. He wanted advice on rebuilding the sales organization. What did you say? I told him that relationships take years to build and minutes to destroy. He said he'd learned that lesson the hard way. Patricia had started a new consulting firm focused on mid-market companies that needed strategic business development but couldn't afford the big-name consulting firms. It was exactly the market segment that Pinnacle had served successfully before the acquisition and subsequent cost-cutting initiatives. I want to offer you a partnership, she said. Equal equity, complete autonomy over client relationships, and the opportunity to build something sustainable rather than just fixing someone else's mistakes. Her offer was compelling for several reasons beyond the financial terms. Patricia understood the consulting business at a fundamental level that Richard Manning never would. She knew that sustainable growth came from long-term client relationships, not quarterly cost optimization. Most importantly, she valued experience as a strategic asset rather than viewing it as an expensive liability. But there was another factor that made her offer particularly attractive. Several of my former clients had approached me about working with them directly rather than through Pinnacle. They wanted the same level of service and relationship management they'd received before, but they were no longer confident that Pinnacle could deliver it consistently. If I partner with you, I told Patricia, I'd want to bring some of my key client relationships along. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. It means potentially competing directly with Pinnacle for some major accounts. Richard Manning made the decision to prioritize cost savings over client relationships. He can live with the consequences. I gave Richard Manning 2 weeks' notice as a consultant, completing my contractual obligations but informing him that I wouldn't be renewing for another year. "We'd like to make you a permanent offer," he said when I informed him of my decision. "Senior VP of Business Development, whatever they're paying you, we can match it." It's not about money, Richard. It's about understanding what business you're actually in. What do you mean? You thought you were in the consulting business, but you're actually in the relationship business. Consulting services are just what you deliver through those relationships. I get that now. We've restructured our entire approach based on what we learned from this experience. That's good, but I've moved on to something different. Patricia Wells and I officially launched our new firm, Strategic Business Partners, 6 months later. Our first major client was Global Tech, who terminated their contract with Pinnacle and moved their account to us after their 1-year commitment expired. "We want to work with people who understand our business and our long-term goals," Marcus Torres told us during the contract signing meeting. "That's worth more than competitive pricing or innovative methodologies." Within 12 months, we'd acquired 5 former Pinnacle clients who specifically requested to work with me personally. We also landed 3 new accounts through referrals from existing clients, something that rarely happened in the commoditized consulting market. But perhaps more satisfying than the business success was the opportunity to work in an environment where experience was valued appropriately. Patricia and I made strategic decisions based on long-term relationship building rather than quarterly profit optimization. We invested in ongoing client education and relationship maintenance rather than constantly pitching new services to maximize billable hours. "This is how consulting should work," I told Patricia after we'd completed our first year in business. "Clients pay for expertise and judgment, not just labor hours." "It's how consulting used to work before private equity firms started treating professional services like manufacturing businesses," she replied. 2 years after my termination from Pinnacle, I was invited to speak at the Regional Business Development Conference about relationship management and professional services. The audience was primarily sales directors and business development professionals from consulting firms throughout the region. "Client relationships in professional services aren't transferable assets," I told them during my presentation. "They're personal connections built over years of delivering results and proving reliability under pressure. When you eliminate experienced relationship managers to reduce personnel costs, you're not optimizing expenses. You're liquidating revenue-generating assets." During the question and answer session, someone asked about the Pinnacle case study that had become somewhat notorious in local business circles. "How could management have handled that transition differently?" the questioner asked. "They could have understood what they were actually buying when they acquired the company," I said. "They weren't just purchasing a client list and a brand name. They were acquiring relationships that had been built over years of consistent performance and trust building. You can't maintain those relationships by replacing experienced professionals with junior staff, regardless of how talented the junior staff might be." Another hand went up. "What advice would you give to companies looking to reduce personnel costs in sales and business development?" "Understand the difference between cost and investment," I replied. "Experienced relationship managers aren't just expensive employees. They're revenue generators whose value compounds over time. Eliminating those positions might improve your quarterly budget, but it destroys the foundation of your long-term revenue model." After my presentation, several people approached me with similar stories about consulting firms, accounting practices, and other professional service organizations that had made identical mistakes. The pattern was always the same: short-term cost reduction initiatives destroying long-term revenue relationships. "It's becoming epidemic in our industry," one consultant told me. "Private equity firms buy professional service companies and immediately try to optimize the cost structure without understanding how the revenue is actually generated." He was absolutely right. The financialization of professional services was creating a systematic undervaluation of relationship-based assets that couldn't be easily quantified on balance sheets. 3 years after leaving Pinnacle, I received an unexpected call from Richard Manning. "I wanted to apologize," he said after identifying himself, "not just for the termination, but for not understanding what I was doing to the business." "I appreciate that, Richard. I've been thinking about what you said when you left, about understanding what business we were actually in. You were completely right. It's a common mistake in our industry. I'm at a different company now, and we're facing some of the same challenges Pinnacle had. Would you be interested in consulting on our business development strategy?" I considered his offer carefully. Richard had clearly learned from his experience at Pinnacle, and everyone deserves an opportunity to apply lessons learned from their mistakes. "Send me a detailed proposal," I said. "Include information about your current client relationships and what kind of consulting engagement you're looking for." "Thank you. And for what it's worth, letting you go was the biggest professional mistake I've ever made. Not just because of the financial impact, but because you deserved much better treatment after 16 years of building that business." Richard's new company, a mid-sized strategy consulting firm, retained strategic business partners for a 6-month engagement focused on sustainable business development practices. The project was successful largely because Richard had learned to value relationship continuity over cost optimization. "This time we're building for the long term," he told me after we completed the engagement. "Client relationships first, cost management second." 4 years after my termination from Pinnacle, my partnership with Patricia Wells had grown into one of the most successful consulting practices in our market. We specialized in industries where long-term relationships and deep expertise were more valuable than competitive pricing or innovative methodologies. Our client retention rate exceeded 95%. Our average contract value increased every year as clients expanded their engagement scope. Most importantly, we'd created a business culture where experienced professionals were valued as strategic assets rather than cost centers. We still received inquiries from larger firms wanting to acquire our practice or hire away our senior consultants. We'd learned to evaluate these opportunities based on cultural fit and long-term sustainability, rather than just financial terms. "Money is obviously important," Patricia told a recruiter who was trying to poach one of our senior associates. "But working in an environment that values your experience and gives you autonomy to build lasting client relationships is invaluable." She was right. The best response to short-sighted management isn't just proving them wrong once. It's building something sustainable that demonstrates the value of experience-based relationship management every single day. Looking back on Richard Manning's decision to terminate me, I realized it taught me something crucial about the difference between cost and value in professional services. Experience isn't just accumulated knowledge. It's judgment, relationships, and the ability to solve complex business problems efficiently because you understand the broader context and long-term implications. Companies that grasp this difference invest in retaining experienced professionals and building sustainable client relationships. Companies that don't understand it optimize themselves out of business by cutting the very assets that generate their revenue. Fresh talent brings energy, new perspectives, and analytical capabilities to established processes. But experience is what clients pay premium rates for, and it's what differentiates professional services from commodity businesses. 5 years after my termination, I was contacted by a business journalist writing an investigative article about the hidden costs of corporate downsizing in professional services. She'd heard about the Pinnacle case through industry sources and wanted to interview me about the experience and its broader implications. "Your story has become something of a cautionary tale in business development circles," she told me during our phone interview. "A perfect example of how short-term cost optimization can backfire spectacularly." "It's not unique to Pinnacle," I said. "This pattern repeats constantly across the professional services industry. The only unusual thing about my situation was that the financial impact was so clearly measurable. The numbers are pretty dramatic. Pinnacle ended up losing more in 6 months of lost revenue than they would have spent on your salary for 5 years. And that doesn't account for the opportunity costs, the damaged relationships with remaining clients, or the impact on employee morale and company reputation." The article was published 3 months later in a major business publication with the headline, "The Relationship Penalty: How Cost-Cutting Destroyed a Consulting Firm's Most Valuable Assets." It included interviews with Richard Manning, who had become an advocate for sustainable staffing practices, and with several other executives who had learned similar lessons from their own downsizing experiences. The article's conclusion captured something I'd been thinking about for years. In professional services, institutional relationships and deep expertise aren't just valuable resources. They're competitive advantages that can't be replicated through cost reduction. Organizations that treat senior relationship managers as expense line items rather than revenue generators do so at their own considerable peril. Reading that article, I realized that my termination from Pinnacle hadn't just been a personal career disruption that I'd managed to overcome successfully. It had become a case study that was helping other companies avoid similar mistakes and other experienced professionals understand their true market value. Sometimes the most effective response to poor judgment is simply succeeding on your own terms and helping others learn from the example. Today, Strategic Business Partners continues to grow steadily. We work on challenging projects with clients who value what we bring to their organizations. We build systems and relationships designed for long-term sustainability rather than short-term profit maximization. Richard Manning has become a successful executive who speaks regularly at industry conferences about the importance of relationship-based business development in professional services. Jessica Chen and David Rodriguez, the MBA graduates who replaced me, both found positions at other firms where they could develop their skills without the pressure of managing relationships they weren't prepared for. And Pinnacle Solutions? They eventually recovered from the client exodus following my termination, rebuilt their business development team around experienced relationship managers, and developed a reputation as a stable place for senior consultants to work. They learned from their mistakes, which is more than many organizations accomplish. But I learned something more valuable: that professional loyalty should be reciprocal, that expertise has genuine market value that extends far beyond salary comparisons, and that sometimes the best career decision is building something of your own, rather than climbing someone else's corporate ladder. They thought I was too costly. But replacing experience with fresh talent cost them everything that actually mattered: client trust, revenue stability, and competitive differentiation. In professional services, you're not just selling solutions. You're selling confidence that those solutions will work based on your track record and judgment. That confidence comes from experience, and experience takes time to develop properly. You can't shortcut relationships, and you can't commoditize trust. Richard Manning learned that lesson the expensive way, but at least he learned it. Phone. "We need to talk," he said when I answered. "About what?" "About coming back. We've had some transition challenges with your accounts." I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the most effective negotiating strategy. "Several clients have expressed concerns about the account transitions," he continued. "They're requesting your continued involvement in their projects." "I'm no longer an employee, Richard. That's what I want to discuss. We'd like to offer you a consulting arrangement. Temporary basis while we complete the transition process." "What kind of consulting arrangement?" "We could bring you back part-time to help with client relations. Maybe 3 days a week while Jessica and David get up to speed." I thought about it. "What's the rate?" "We were thinking your previous salary prorated for part-time hours." "My consulting rate is $500 per hour." Long pause. "That's significantly higher than your previous compensation." "That's the market rate for senior consulting expertise, supply and demand." "We'd need to discuss that with finance." "You know where to find me." Richard didn't call back immediately. I assumed they were trying to handle the client situation internally, probably hoping the relationships would stabilize once Jessica and David had more time to establish rapport. But the crisis was accelerating. Morrison Manufacturing canceled their annual strategy assessment, a project worth $800,000, after David Rodriguez presented a proposal that missed the key operational constraints Catherine Phillips had outlined in their initial meeting. He recommended solutions that would require us to shut down production for 6 weeks. Catherine told Richard during what became known around the office as the phone call from hell. Either he doesn't understand our business or he doesn't care about our requirements. Pacific Industries, another long-term client, announced they were switching to a competitor after Jessica Chen failed to identify a regulatory compliance issue that could have cost them millions in penalties. It was the kind of industry-specific knowledge that takes years to develop and can't be learned from textbooks. But the final straw came from Sterling Corporation, our second largest account. Their CEO, Patricia Hawkins, didn't just cancel their pending projects. She flew out personally to meet with Richard and terminated their master services agreement entirely. "Your company has changed," she told him. "The person we trusted is gone, and his replacements don't have the experience or judgment to handle our level of complexity. We're taking our business elsewhere." Sterling Corporation represented $6 million in annual revenue. 4 weeks after my termination, Richard called again, this time at 8 p.m. on a Friday night. "We need to make a deal," he said, skipping all pleasantries. "What kind of deal?" "Full consulting contract, your rate, your terms. We need you back immediately." To do what exactly? Save the accounts we're losing, fix the relationships that have been damaged, get things back to where they were. I was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. "Richard, you fired me because you thought 2 recent graduates could do my job for less money. Now you want to hire me back as a consultant at a rate that's 3 times what you were paying me as an employee." The situation has evolved. The situation has evolved because you didn't understand what you were optimizing away. These client relationships took 16 years to build. You can't replace that with MBA credentials and fresh analytical approaches. I understand that now. Do you? Because this isn't just about bringing me back to fix an immediate crisis. If you want to rebuild these relationships, it's going to take time and consistent effort. You can't just patch things up and then make the same mistake again in 6 months. What are you proposing? A 1-year consulting contract at my stated rate. Exclusive arrangement, meaning I work only with Pinnacle clients during that period, and I have final say on account management decisions for the clients I'm handling. Another long pause. That's going to cost us significantly more than your original salary. It's going to cost you significantly less than losing 40% of your major accounts. Richard agreed to my terms the following Monday. But by then, it was too late to save several key relationships. Sterling Corporation had already signed with Deloitte. Pacific Industries had moved their account to McKinsey. TechFlow had decided to handle their projects internally rather than risk another consulting relationship. Of the remaining accounts, some were salvageable and some weren't. Global Tech stayed after I personally called Marcus Torres and walked him through a transition plan that addressed his specific concerns. Morrison Manufacturing agreed to a reduced contract scope after I spent 3 days on-site rebuilding Catherine Phillips' confidence in Pinnacle's capabilities. But the damage was substantial. Richard's cost-cutting initiative had reduced personnel expenses by $180,000 annually. My salary and benefits. However, the lost revenue from canceled contracts and reduced project scopes totaled over $8 million. The math was brutal but simple. They'd saved money on personnel costs while destroying the relationships that generated revenue. New.